Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today I wanted to talk about some etiquette for getting people to read your books because I've experienced some things recently and over the past couple of years that I think are worth talking about, especially because I generally try to accept reading stuff that is recommended to me or suggested to me in a reasonable manner, not everything, because I do still have preferences. And I still will discern whether or not it is something that is going to be torture for me to read. But I do try to accommodate, and I do get DMs or emails every now and then asking me to read stuff or look at stuff. And so then, from my experiences as a reader and from as somebody who is asked to read as well, and just from somebody existing in the space with writers that every day I get less and less empathy for, it's not good. I'm also a writer, obviously, and watching writers do things has made me a lot less yeah, to the plight. I've been mistreated by writers so much that I am just like, but before we get into that, let's let's cover the basics. Number one, if you enjoy what I do here on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through LMY, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt. You write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. You submit your first chapter and your cover. It'll be right here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work, because I might not be your reader, but they might be out there and hopefully can help facilitate finding. Also, sometimes I pick up books from the Fresh Meat feature because they seem interesting, even if it takes me a little time to get to them. I swear. Got The Dark Violinist. I got Ribbons of Sand, which was done back in December. So I grabbed books off of there. I have a couple others in there that I meant to grab, and I have to go find them now. But there's stuff that's in there. Number three, if you would like to check out any of my books, the links are down in the description below. You can also get them at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. Stay tuned, stick around to check out, to bask in the last of the Bodymore books. The next time you will see any of those characters will be in M.M. Morris's series, the Numina series, which she is dutifully working on now, and it is going to be something beautiful. But until then, you'll have to look at the faces of my characters in Bodymore. And Bodymore Zero is going to come out later this year. Hope you are looking forward to it. I am. Because you know what? I've been waiting for people to talk about Ralph and Casey freaking 2 years. Now the book is about them. I'm gonna have to talk about Ralph and Casey. That's not what inspired it, but I love them. Okay, I love them. But also, Casey is such a jackass. Just know that. Anyway, that said, let's get into the book etiquette. I know I'm going, maybe read my books in a book as we're talking about book reading etiquette. Anyway, now before we get started, let me make the disclaimer that there are no rules specifically on how to do this, what works for all people, what is more likely to get you in with all people. I can only tell you my opinions on what I've seen, what I've experienced, what I prefer, and then you can use your judgment on, discarding some of whatever I say or keeping whatever I say, or just using it as food for thought on how you want to approach people in the future, because that's all that I'm trying to do, is just give these are some things that I've thought, some things that I've seen and experienced, and so this is just what I can tell you. The other thing is that know that reading is a subjective experience. No matter how many people talk about objectivity, people generally remember how a book made them feel as opposed to what the actual technical aspects of it were. So if a book has somebody feeling great, then they're going to remember it more, especially in like a way that they want to feel, even if it's sad. If it makes them feel in a way that they wanted to feel, then they're going to remember it more positively. If it's something that they actually like, if it's something that they prefer, they're also going to respond to it more positively. But just because somebody doesn't like it doesn't mean that somebody else will not like it or that it doesn't have value. If you're trying to become a better writer with more commercial appeal, then you're going to want to listen to more people within that specific genre to see how you can appeal more to the readers of that genre. And also, you're going to learn that not all feedback is helpful feedback to you as a writer, to becoming a better writer, but also reader reviews are not necessarily going to help the author ever, because it's just it's a consumer response is what a review is. So just knowing all of these things may be very, very helpful. Also, go and read reader reviews at your own risk, because often they are not they're not coddling, because the readers are just expressing themselves. And we're going to get into that in a little bit, because I have a section on my suggestions for this from problems that I've seen throughout. Anyway, so that is the disclaimer before we get started. Just so you know, this isn't a generalization. This is a widespreading rule that'll make everything work, but they are based on my observations, experiences. And as always, I'm going to be looking forward to your guys' thoughts in the comments down below if you've had experiences with this, or what you think of anything that I say going forward. Now, the first recommendation that I have for you is, if you are thinking of asking a specific person to read your book, whether it is in person or online, I would investigate what that person likes or learn their preferences if possible. This can be done via just basic discussion, especially if you're a bookseller, because I've been to AWP and I've bought a couple of books, brought home a couple of free books from AWP, and like standing around talking to the booksellers and getting to know, even especially at things where they are small presses, or the booksellers are also the authors. You can learn a lot about the books from the author, and the author really wants to know what your interests are. Now, you might have miscommunications because people kind of take a lot of what I say as my preferences as generalizations one way or another, but you still want to try to engage with that person if you're going to try to sell them the book, to see if it's going to be a good fit. Because if it's not a good fit, if they're not interested in what you're selling, in the books, the story ideas that you're selling, then you're probably more likely to end up with either a negative review or no review, because they're just not going to like that book. So learning the preferences of that person is paramount to having a good response. The other thing is, you don't really want to maliciously be sending people books that are not of their interest, because it just is bad. It looks bad, it's disrespectful, and it's going to possibly ruin opportunities for other people. I think back to the Kay Webster situation, where she, in her own video, said that she went down lists of readers online to send her book The Wild to. And if you've got a book that is so taboo, that is so specific, then you want to double check that readers are going to be interested in that. Otherwise, you're going to get backlash of people saying this is terrible and a bunch of bad reviews. Now, some people use that bad review wave as marketing to say that you're being canceled, which is also one way to go, but it is also disrespectful. And who am I to say anything about your way of marketing? Be the person that you want to be, but I think that bad marketing practices, deception, and tricking people to hurt people is a despicable practice. Now, if that's what Kay Webster did, I couldn't tell you, but I do think that lying or trying to hurt the reader specifically is a bad practice. There are also always the authors who will learn what your preferences are and then be like, look, I know you don't like this thing, but I think that mine will be the one that changes you. I can understand and I applaud the enthusiasm, the belief in your own work, but I think that sort of mindset will also set you up to be disappointed later when your book is not the one to change somebody's perspective. Like, I don't want to sound harsh or mean, but it's kind of egotistical to think, okay, this person doesn't like a lot of these tropes, this person doesn't like this writing style, but mine will be the one to change them. Like, you can think that, but prepare your expectations accordingly, that if you go against somebody's preferences, they're probably not going to like your book. In my case, if your book is heavily sexual or fetishistic, if your book is heavily negative, if your logic doesn't seem to follow, if character comes second, I'm probably not going to like your book. And a lot of people really seem to misunderstand what I mean by character-driven stories or character-heavy stories. Like, it follows the characters specifically, their decisions matter. Like, that's really it. And pretty much 80 to 90% of the story should be character-related, as opposed to, world building and magic and all of that. Now, none of these are just, this is how it has to be for me to like it, in the same way that you might say you like women, you don't like every woman. But learning those preferences and then purposefully defying them is not only disrespectful to the individual that you are approaching, but it is also very likely to get your feelings hurt if you think that your story is really, really great and probably works really, really great in your genre, but you reach outside that and you're playing Russian roulette. That's all I'm going to say. The next recommendation that I have is learn to pitch. Now, I've had a couple of people come to me in emails with, hey, would you like to read my book? Here is what it's about. Here is about how long it is. And I had one person that I know asked me to read their book, and I asked them what it's about. And instead of telling me what it's about and like talking to me as a person, they basically sent me an email that was an ad talking about all of these quotes that other people had about their books and how wonderful it is. So obviously, since other people like it, then I'm going to like it, right? And talking about representation in it and just doing the sales pitch to treat it like I was watching an ad instead of talking to me as a person. Now, the same as in the first suggestion and the second suggestion, if you talk to me as a person and we make that connection where I'm now invested in your characters because we've talked on a human level, I'm going to be more likely to read your book. This is also why I have a tendency to, if I talk to people in the chat, I might not get to your books as quickly as I would like, again, because I have a backlog of horror right now, like, and not horror the genre, it's just horribly long. But I do try to pick up books of people that have interacted with me personally or in the group because I want to know more about people. I've picked up the first Lucy December book. I've picked up, there was Rachel Morley's book, Let There Be Fire, and the second book in that series. There's Vlad's book. So I do try to pick up books of people that I interact with, also if I know what their books are. It just takes me time to get there. So learn to pitch. Pitching can also be really, really hard to learn how to do because you have to compress your huge story with all of its nuances and all of its character and all of that love that you've put into it into something easily digestible for somebody who is not you, who doesn't have that connection yet, to get them enticed. And then when they're like, oh, I want to know more, then you can start like dropping it all on them. So a pitch for me, when I'm looking at it, and I've had this problem before too, where I ask somebody, okay, tell me what your story is about. And instead of telling me what the story is about, they tell me the mechanics of the story, or they tell me these nuances that really don't matter to me because I don't know what the planet Schmugadador is. And I don't know who Babadagi McPherson is. But if you tell me that this is a story about an outlaw who is trying to get revenge for the father that was murdered when he was a child, I'm going to be like, okay, I understand what the story is. So that's really what pitching comes down to, is when I ask somebody for a pitch of their story, I want to know who the main character is or who they are if there's more than one. What do they want? What are they trying to do? And what stands in their way? The last thing that you can add is what happens if they fail, but you don't necessarily have to. And then the way that I typically write synopses when I'm looking at a story is I look at the first 30% of the book. This is synopses for like my stories when I'm writing it for the blurb. And so you take the first 30% of the book, or the first up until the first major, switcheroo in a plot line, because I kind of divide my books into separate acts based on if the life just changed around them. I think Bodymore Zero actually has 4 acts if I were to cut it up appropriately, but that's what I do, because then you're going to get the inciting incident of where the whole rest of the book is going to go. So if I look at Boom Boom Boom, that book is about a Ukrainian YouTuber who loves explosives and lives on the border between Ukraine and Russia. One day he sets off such an exciting explosives show that a couple of sponsors from the United States show up at his doorstep and offer him military-grade explosives. This turns into an even bigger light show. Then the American sponsors invite him to come to the United States, where he can have his own film studio in Washington, D.C. There's nothing fishy about that, is there? That's not a polished pitch, but it is going to tell you basically what is happening in the story, who the story is about, and where it's going to go, because now you know that he's going to end up in the United States. But why? How? Is he going to know that he's in trouble? With Bodymore, it's about a mechanic who goes to the infamous murder park in Baltimore to pick up the car of her friend. When she gets there, he's missing, and later she finds a body in the trunk, which brings the police in, but now they can't find her best friend still, so she goes on a hunt to find that missing best friend and ends up discovering a town of ghosts underneath Baltimore. What is happening in this cursed city? So there's basically a setup for Bodymore, where you're going to get the vibe of who the main character is, what she's doing, what the setting is. You got ghosts and that it's supernatural. Then you've got the pitch for Dead End Drive, which is going to be something like, in an illustrious estate in Louisiana, the heiress dies, initiating the traditional battle royale, where everyone invited for that night is free to become the next heir, so long as they survive the night. That's pretty much it's an ensemble cast, so it's harder to pin down, but you know what that book is about. We're talking about Bodymore Zero. The pitch is going to be Ralph is a drummer for Badass Idiot Train. His best friend is the lead singer, and one night at a concert, Please bear with me. I haven't done this one yet. One night at a concert, Casey gets stabbed after the show and dies. A couple days later, he comes back and it appears as if he's come. A couple of days later, Ralph gets a phone call and it appears as if Casey has returned from the dead. But almost nobody that can recognize him. And Ralph desperately wants to help his best friend return to normalcy. It seems impossible until an accident at a concert venue turns into teleporting to Cave Mortem, which sets into motion Ralph's choice toward destiny. So it's going to be something like that. Probably not, but something like that. So that kind of tells you what these stories are going to be about. Learn to pitch. That's the big thing. If somebody says, hey, what is your story about? You can boil it down very, very quickly to who is the main character? What do they want? What stands in their way? And that is going to be more than enough if somebody is going to be interested to then start asking for more. But you got to boil it down to as small a thing as possible to make that pitch, and to treat the person that you're talking to like a person, not like somebody that you're waiting to like get their money purse out. The next recommendation that I have is to respect the person's time. Not only the time that you're spending in talking to that person about like, hey, would you pick up this book? How would you like this book? Like, you don't want to waste that time by over explaining everything or going into rabbit trails of things that don't really matter. But you also don't want to waste their time with your book. Because when it comes to spending time, you know, people have a finite amount of time. And if I'm reading your book, then I'm not reading somebody else's book, or I'm not playing a video game, or I'm not doing something else entirely. I am giving my attention to your book, which is great until I feel like my time is wasted. And I do feel like time can be wasted, especially with long page lengths. Like, I felt like my time was wasted in Amygdala. There was so much extra content that didn't matter, that contradicted itself, that at 1,025 pages, it felt like my time was wasted. Especially because that book was against stuff that I generally like, and that's one of the ways it was introduced to me, is I know that this is not your thing, but I think it might be your thing because... And just respect the person's time. Know that when they are picking up your book, they are choosing you over other people. Which is another thing to just be grateful for. Which leads me into my next point. Don't expect other people to care about your story or to feel entitled to their responses. So if somebody might say, I will pick up your book, I'm going to read it, it starts to become a chore. And it starts to become scary for readers in some cases. If the author becomes overbearing, if the author becomes overly pokey, if the author is standing over the reader as they're trying to read and then trying to dictate how the reader is supposed to read something. I love the idea of getting to talk to authors about their books to better understand what the author was going for and what their intentions were versus what the intentions that I picked up were. Like the cross-pollination. I think it's such a cool idea. But you have to be also willing to understand that other people are going to have a different relationship with your work than you do. And it's very difficult. I understand. I've gotten some, critical reviews. I've gotten reviews from people that say they hate what I do. And you know what? I know. I can't stop anybody, and I don't want to stop anybody from having the personal experience that they have with my work. It's an honor for somebody to choose to spend their time reading something that I wrote. But that's not how it always happens when you're a reader. So even if somebody says, hey, I'm going to read this, don't expect a response, and don't expect somebody to love it or feel entitled to being told where the problems are, because that can get to be a lot. Unless you hire somebody, then you can't have all of the expectations in the world. The next thing that I want to say is know that you can be the one to cause a person's burnout. And this can happen in a lot of ways. So some people may have the doors open to say, hey, I will accept from a wide variety of places, from a wide variety of things. I want to give indies a chance, blah, blah, blah. But if you consistently send somebody like terrible things, or people consistently try to send things that are against what somebody likes and trick somebody into reading things they don't like, that could actually be the thing that shuts the door on others from being able to have that opportunity, because at some point people get tired of feeling like they're being taken advantage of or tortured or being told, hey, you said that you would do this, so now I'm going to hold it over your head so that you do it because I want you to read this thing that is against what you enjoy. I am going to corrupt you in some cases. I have known people that are like, oh, you don't like this thing? Let me try to force you to read this thing because I think it's funny to corrupt those who don't want to read this thing. I've seen that happen also with the smut people talking about putting smut in clean fiction to force the clean fiction readers to read smut. Like, if you submit too much in a negative context, it can burn a person out. There's also, if you send somebody too much stuff, then that can also burn somebody out. I had a friend or an acquaintance I've had a couple of acquaintances that asked, hey, can you read my book and give me feedback on it? And let me tell you, feedback, especially developmental feedback, takes a lot of time. The earlier on in the phase that a book is, the more feedback it needs, and the harder giving feedback is because it is so time consuming. But I had a couple of people who were in the middle of their first draft, and they're like, here, I just wrote this chapter. Can you give me feedback on it? And so you say, okay. And then you give feedback on it. And so then they rewrite that chapter, and an hour or two later, they're like, can you give me feedback on this? And then you give feedback on it. And then like 5 minutes later, they're like, I just redid these 3 paragraphs. What do you think? I just did this paragraph. What do you think? I just did this paragraph again. What did you think? And it just keeps going in that cycle of getting faster and faster and faster. Now, if you're going to be asking other people to give you specifically critical feedback or developmental editing, my preference is to have the completed work finished, because I can't tell you how something is going to play out without seeing the whole arc of what it is trying to do. Because something at the end can totally change how stuff at the beginning works. If you look at Bodymore, I think that you don't get the full payoff of the series until you read all 3 books, because a lot of the payoff and a lot of things from the first 2 books actually come back in the 3rd book, and you get to see many of those things resolve, and you get to see the change of Joey through what's happened in the 3rd book. So I can't tell you if stuff is going to work early on in your book if I can't read the whole of the arc. That's also why I read all of His Name Was Augustin series, to see if the whole arc changed it. That's why I generally try to read from beginning to end of almost everything I read, so that I can try to get an idea of how the story goes based on the way that it's put together. But if you're going to ask, it can be very much a burnout if you just keep throwing the same thing at people over and over and over again. So it's better, at least in my opinion, and everybody works differently, but to send it all in one go to somebody that you trust, and then to let them do their thing. Going back to, I love the idea of back and forths with authors, with creators, to talk about the stories and the intent and the characters. It's also a scary thing, because like, I never want to control how other people respond to things. I never want to control how other people interpret things, but I also don't want people to feel like I'm going to ignore them if they want to talk about anything that I have done or anything that they have done. And I want to show that I'm truly grateful if anybody ends up reading my works. But at the same time, you have to be very, very careful that you don't start arguing with people for what their interpretation of your work is. Now, it might not be what you intended, and that can be really disheartening in some cases, or it can be insulting in other cases, like if you're called names or kind of libeled in some ways based on what's in a story. But you have no control over what people think of your story once you hand it out to other people. That's just the nature of the beast. And so you can disagree with somebody's interpretation. You can acknowledge that you don't agree with that difference. But arguing specifically with a reader is not going to change their mind, and it's really just going to chase them away from reading more of your stuff. So if you ask somebody for feedback, it's generally not a good idea to scream or argue or talk down to or call somebody stupid. Oh my gosh. So I think I've covered this at least 2 or 3 times. One of them was in the recent Sam Fenna video. Another time was a couple of years ago when I read His Name Was Augustin, and the whole drama around His Name Was Augustin, which was the author trying to figure out what genre her book fit into. And so there were some people that were trying to help her figure that out, because they were avid readers, and they were like, well, we'll be your first readers and try to help you place it in a genre. And so they read it. They ended up not liking it. They have huge read lists because they just read a lot. But so they honestly just read it, said they didn't like it, but then that's pretty much it. And the author then started a 3-month-long campaign on her social media that neither of them used, where she was calling them stupid and gallivanting her subscribers or her readers through that by using political language, by talking about being canceled, by being called, by saying that they were calling her Nazis, specifically politically charged language on this media website. So I realized that I couldn't actually talk about the book without having read it. So then I started reading it, which is how I ended up reading His Name Was Augustin, period, so that I could talk about it and be accurate, because I didn't want to get into the conversation without knowing what the actual contents of the book are. And then 3 months later, she still hadn't stopped doing it. So then I mentioned it in my second video review of her books, and that turned her into asking me and blaming me for the poor responses of other people, saying, was I the one that approved of what these other people were saying? Was I the one telling people what to say? Where previously with the first video review, I said she's asked for more. So arguing with people, targeting people because you don't like their reviews is not going to look great. If you get a bad book review because of something like that, just know that it didn't reach your ideal reader. And or if you get enough people saying the same thing, then maybe review if your book is doing what you think it's doing. Otherwise, it's just better not to. It's just better not to. I know some of my things. It's different if you go, okay, so I have a personal relationship with you. You read the book. You're telling me these things. Do you mind if I kind of ask you what gave you that impression? Totally different than like, no, you're wrong. You just misinterpreted that. You just don't understand. You're stupid. You're trying to ruin my business. You're against me. We've seen the same thing with some of the Ripaverse stuff too. So, and also with Shad's book. So it's not personal. It's just a book review. And some of it is personal, but going into every book review as if any disagreement is because somebody is stupid and you're going to insult the other person for not seeing what you want them to see, not good. It's best to avoid trying to use people to clout seek. Like, you obviously want to get your book in the hands of people that are going to have an audience to show your book to. But sending your book to somebody only because they have an audience and not because you think that they will like your book, and you really just want to use them for that exposure is really disrespectful. And I don't think that it's going to put you off on a good foot, and it's going to probably get you some not good reviews, because if the book is not tickle that person's preferences, you're either going to get nothing or you're going to get a bad review. You could also end up being the reason for the reader's burnout, because again, it's just people trying to use somebody else's, it's just people trying to use somebody else in order to benefit themselves at the expense of somebody else. I get the desire to have everybody read and love your book, but it's not going to happen. Not everybody can love your book. A couple of side comments. A lot of people are discouraged from reading new authors or talking about books because the fans of those books or authors might come out at you with insults of being you're stupid, you're sensitive, and it's not about having different opinions. Now it's just everything that you say is invalid because it's not positive. I have been the receiver of stuff like this where it's just coming at you. If you look at enough booktuber content, you start seeing people regularly disclaimering their book reviews with, this isn't for the author, this isn't for the fans of the author, because they'll come at you and attack you. If you look at, oh my gosh, the Shadow of the Conqueror book reviews have so many insults in them. And it's like, if you wanted me to like the author of this book, the way to get there is not by attacking me. Like, I'm not going to have any more good feelies by being insulted by people who like this thing passionately. You're not going to shame me into thinking this is a better book. You're not going to bully me into thinking this is a better book. You're just going to make me go, see the kind of person you are, but I'm not going to shut up. This sort of response creates a toxic culture between readers and writers, and readers. You know, if you start attacking people for reading a book differently. But I think turning everything into a battleground of me right, you wrong, has actually been super harmful and discouraging for discourse in general. Another situation that I saw with the author going after readers in a way that is just like, why are we here? Was back with Flames of Leith, when there was a reader who left a review that was like, And the author actually went into the comments on the book of Flames of Leith to call that reader cunty for having left a review and accused her of trying to ruin the book and the author's business by leaving a critical book review of preference. Don't do this. Let people have the responses that they have. Look, one of my least favorite things recently has been uber fans of random people, be it, Eric July, Shad Brooks, Sam Fenna, any of them that go, you just don't understand. Look at all of this information that you're missing. Look, you are just misrepresenting. I don't know. You're so stupid. That's fine if I miss something. We're all going to cling to different things in the story. Like, I always like to reference when Alex and I talked about Shadow of the Conqueror, because he really focused on this world building mechanics and I really focused on the character stuff, because that's just where our interests lie in reading a book. And so I wasn't paying attention to any of the mathematics in that because I just don't freaking care. And so we're going to have different interests and then focus on those different interests and either pick apart or love those different areas of interest. However, the conversation is so stupid and unnecessary when it's no one gets mad at you when you miss things on the first read and then find them later on future read. They actually praise you for seeing that other content that you would get the second time around. However, if you're critical of a book, then all of a sudden you're a stupid person who is barely literate, who doesn't have any business talking about books because you didn't couch every single itty bitty reference in a book the first time you read it. I've seen more than a couple of authors have that sort of elitism, like, oh, you didn't get how I just did this massive, huge allusion to this other bigger 5,000-year-old tome of a book in mine, and you didn't see that? You are such an uneducated, uncultured idiot. Okay. If you ever wonder why YouTubers or reviewers won't read your book when you ask them to, this could be one of the reasons why. Nobody knows what kind of person you are, and very few who like reading don't like the feeling of reading a book and then being told that you're an idiot for not reading it the correct way. A lot of people don't like the backlash, and it's not that you can't have a discussion where you disagree on elements of the book, but there's a difference between having a discussion about a book and the elements of it and insulting and degrading somebody else for having a different perspective on it. If you're going to engage in the discussion of the book, then you have to respect that people are just going to see things differently. One of the other book reviews that I did was with Effie Loves Books, and we did No Longer Human. I'm also looking forward to the collaboration we're going to do in the future with a couple of books. And we have such drastically different perspectives and different values, but it doesn't change how I feel about her as a person, because I think she's a really great person. And even more than that, our different perspectives and our different values and our different backgrounds influence the ways that we approach books and the things that we stick to in books. And it was talking to her about No Longer Human that I actually gathered more of an appreciation for it, as opposed to if I was reading it on my own. The same could even be said for Amygdala, where I was talking about it with somebody on the server, and he had such a very different perspectives on it and a very different interest, because his interest is more in fantasy. So I was getting a lot more out of it by having the discussions with him that I really appreciate having people to talk to stories about, in order to sort of make sense of, or even just talk about things in the story. The elements, the discussions are so interesting when you can have them. But when it just makes it hostile, it just discourages people from actually discussing or partaking in any of these things. And then you're like, well, this person says, I want you to read my book, but then later they get mad at you for reading their book the wrong way because now your platform is a problem. Do you want the advantage of the platform or not? Is it only if it's in the good graces? Like, that's one of the things. I used to follow a bunch of writers on like Twitter, and even on Minds. I was a part of a group of writers on Minds as well. And let me just say that didn't turn out very well. I kind of noticed that a lot of them used me in the beginning, and most of them are not around still. Some of them are, and I appreciate all of the people that have been sincere, but it's not like I haven't noticed the group of them that move around, the group of them that pretended I didn't exist because I wouldn't play a game of only giving positive reviews in order to fight the power. And it's not like I wasn't sent a DM that after I posted a review of Why Not Wichita by Mr. Leader at the time, telling me that I needed to not do that because we needed to stick together and I needed to post reviews to fight the power. So if you ever wonder why I don't necessarily like writers, I like people who write. I like plenty of people who are also writers, but I don't like the writing community as a whole. And I think that there is a big problem with ego in it, and also a problem with people that just want to make money. And I have been mistreated by the writing community and people that call themselves writers a lot, to the point that I just don't anymore. And I see a lot of disrespect within the writing community. I'm going to share a Twitter account and then probably another account of something, though I don't have it pulled up right now. But the final recommendation that I have for asking people to read your book is that if you write fiction of any sort, then you also need to read fiction. You also need to form your opinions about fiction for other people for multiple reasons. Reading helps you write better. It helps you see what other people are doing. Most of the questions that I'm ever asked about, can I do this in writing? What's this look about in writing? How do I recognize this genre? All of these questions, 90% of them or more, are answered if you read and you see what other people are doing, because what you're doing has been done before in other things. Not only that, but if you read, you will start to find stories that you both like and dislike, elements that you both like and dislike, that draw you to them and repulse you. You'll see what it's like to have a personal human response to a book that you're just not interested in, so that when you get criticism on your book, then you can realize a lot easier that it's not personal. It's just an interpretation or an interaction with the book. If you don't read, then you're more likely, I think that you're more likely to take feedback personally, because you're not used to seeing in somebody else's book things that you don't like and responding and going, this is terrible, I hate this. But it's not personal. I would never want to control anybody's responses to my books in the same way that I would never want anyone else to control my responses. It's just me reading a book, having a good time or not. And that's ultimately what books are meant to do, right? You're meant to feel something, whether it's good or bad. Now, the actual final thing that I want to mention. The actual final thing that I want to mention that authors should be wary of, because I've seen it happen more and more recently, and it's one of the things that has made me dislike authors more. Not all writers, not all authors, but there is a specific brand of author that I'm like, not to be an elitist here, but a little bit. I've seen way too many authors taking 1-star reviews from any of their sales pages just to mock or belittle the 1-star review. So in this case, you've got A.R. Kalfer, who says, I constantly am promoting myself and my fellow authors. I engage regularly with readers and love being a part of all social media. I apologize to the readers whose posts I promoted myself on, and I apologize to you as well. I'm sorry that you were offended. Now, I don't know if that is sincere or if that is being cheeky. It could be either. I personally am not very good at reading people, so I'm not going to guess. But you go down here and you see this review that is a 1-star review. It looks like it's on Goodreads. And it says, author responded to a Twitter post asking for, what's the latest book that got you out of a reading slump? I'm looking for something kind of cracktastic, happily ever after, only and bingeable series for bonus points with self-promo of own book. Absolutely not. I thought we left this cringe behavior by indie authors behind a decade ago, but apparently not. So I think that it is inappropriate to grab any 1-star reviews in order to mock the person. And I think that it is also, I obviously said this, I sort of said this before with marketing, because this is obviously a marketing ploy to me. Whether this author truly feels bad or not about it, this is a marketing ploy where it is now saying, I feel so sad. I was kicked for doing this. I can't believe that I was a problem on self-promoting on somebody else's thing. A lot of people, when they're asking for book recommendations, do not want self-promotion from indie authors, or else they will just be flooded with self-promotion from indie authors, okay? Many do find that to be disrespectful to the original poster, because you're just trying to sell things. You're trying to sell yourself, which, take it how you will. If you're going to have that behavior, just take it in stride that that is what you've done. You're never going to please everyone. But I think that this sort of thing is tacky. And I don't think that you should be I don't think that you should be highlighting 1-star people in order to mock them or highlight them specifically on your social media so that you can grandstand on them. There was another one that I saw a couple weeks ago where the guy had written what he called a historical fiction, and the story did say historical fiction in the tags. I remember because I went to look on Amazon or in its categories. And it had zombies in it, so it was obviously an alternate history, a sci-fi of sorts, probably. And somebody in the review, and the author of that book had screen capped the 1-star review and posted it on his page because somebody had said that they didn't appreciate seeing modern feminism in a book set in medieval Japan. And so then he started fishing for feedback, going, well, I'm sorry if this offends you, that, I stand up for women, that I like women, this sort of thing, where it was virtue signaling, where it was standing on the virtue in order to defend against the bigoted little ones. And I've seen that same thing being used in other cases where it's like, oh, this person just doesn't like my book because there are gays in it. Look at them. And then that's also used in order to sell more books because it's victimizing the self. And even when you cross out the name, if you don't have very many reviews on your book, people are going to know who that person is. So you're not doing anything by crossing out the name, but you are dogpiling on somebody in order to sell your books. People are going to dislike your book. It's fine. It's not a personal attack. It's not going to sink your business. Every single book that exists out there has people who disagree with the way that it's written, with the message of it, the themes of it that they see, and it's not going to ruin you. But I do think this sort of catty behavior of clipping 1-star reviews in order to boost yourself by being whatever this is not good. And for me as a reader, it would shoo me off of reading that author or wanting to talk about that book. Because am I going to be the next one that gets targeted for this? The authors are clearly watching the readers' spaces in order to grab stuff that they want to put on their social media to then, dogpile on? But maybe that's because I had the other situation. But maybe that's because I have the experience with CL Carhart and her targeting people for 3 months by doing this exact same thing and then misappropriating it. Just accept that if you write something, this kind of goes, I guess, with the video that I did last week called "You Are Going to Be Offended." That video was not me saying I am specifically going to offend you in this day, though there were things in that video that I did expect to offend some people. But it's the fact that things will exist that will be offensive to you. Whether it's somebody saying, I can't believe that you would pitch your own book on somebody else's book recommendation page, whether it's this person looking at that person being offended by a marketing strategy, whether it's the other author being offended by the reader saying, I can't believe that there is, Western feminism in this Eastern medieval story. You're going to be offended by what somebody says. Think about what you do before acting the fool is all I could say. And that's a bit of an insult to fools. I've talked about it on more than one occasion on this channel where there's just been discussions in different places of entitlement from authors, where authors think that they deserve or are entitled to your money, your attention, your high ratings, where people say, how dare you give something lower than a 4-star? Somebody worked really freaking hard on that. And the thing is, you spent time on it, but so did I. You're not owed anything for the time that you've spent on things. So there is a problem with author entitlement of thinking that you deserve something for putting in the time. And then that just creates more entitlement. It's kind of funny because I will talk about the entitlement of some fans and the entitlement of some creators. And it'll obviously piss off people on both sides of that coin because one will get mad at one thing and not the other because it's applicable to them. I do think that there is a difference between one hoping for the best, hoping that people love your thing, but then also getting to do what you want and then expecting, and then keeping your expectations low. That's pretty much it, right? So I think it's just an interesting subject because in a way, I think that when it comes to book reviews and talking about books, books are such a personal thing. One, not just because of the time you spent on them, but two, because people put pieces of their heart in the books. If they're not just products. If they're products, I'm not even talking about the products because the product line books are pretty much throwaway books. They don't matter. But books that people individualize, that are not just a production line item, people put their hearts into. So then it feels like when somebody is talking about a book or a character, it feels like they're talking about you when they're not. And so then it can feel like that you have a much more intimate relationship with a reader, or the reader has a much more intimate relationship with you than they actually do because a book is such a personal thing. And so I guess I think that the relationship between readers and authors is interesting because of that personal aspect that happens without the reader, without the author being there. You can get people that really, really, really care about certain authors because they really love their book and they feel like they know that author through reading their books. And it's an interesting psychological phenomena. I feel it's an interesting thing. The building of a relationship through that time spent in that story, through the affection built for those characters. And then, that's what then causes a lot of the fighting, whether it's in the fandom, outside of the fandom, between what the author and the reader's relationships are. It's very interesting. And I don't know where to take that conversation, actually. So if you have anything to say on that building relationship through reading, through books, let me know in the comments down below, because I would love to have more discourse on that, but I don't even know how to lead a conversation or where to go with a conversation like that. So I would love your thoughts on it. So those are just some of my thoughts, because I sort of watch the discourse going on, and I am part of the reader-writer discourse, being a reader and a writer myself, and wanting to talk about books and wanting to engage about books and hearing other people's opinions on books that we've both read. And it gets really exhausting to be constantly attacked by people if you pick up certain books. And sometimes it does feel like it's an attempt to control the narrative around the book, because if they can bully you enough into deleting your response, which happened on Flames of Leith, then they can control the response to the book. And it's silly. It's all very silly. It's just a book review. It's just a book response. It's just a personal response to something, and it doesn't equate to any inherent value. At least mine doesn't. I can't speak for anybody else's opinion, but my opinion doesn't have that much value. It's just how I feel. And so here we are. With that said, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have you seen some weird author-reader discourse, reader-reader discourse? Have you been involved in some bizarre reader-reader discourse, reader-author discourse? What do you think of all of this? Are you as jaded as I am when it comes to certain things? Let me know. With that said, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out? The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him. Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?